So today's focus, it is the Roundabout tool in the Autodesk vehicle tracking add-in. We've done a previous webinar on vehicle tracking. I'll talk about that in a second. The skill level, I'd say it's intermediate to advanced. It's an introduction to the tool, but it's a fairly advanced tool. It builds some fairly complex corridors, and so I say it's not beginner because you need to have some understanding of alignments, profiles, assemblies, and corridors to understand how this thing is working. So that's the focus for today. So Autodesk vehicle tracking, what is it? Well, we'll call it AVT from now on. It's an add-in for AutoCAD-based products. Now we're going to be working within Civil 3D because with Civil 3D you get a 3D corridor model out of it. But you can run Autodesk vehicle tracking in plain AutoCAD, and you can do 2D roundabout design. So AVT it's formerly from Savoy. It was called AutoTrack, and it was acquired I think about a couple of years ago from Autodesk. And it has three core modules. The first one is the swept path analysis, and that's probably the legacy one. That's the main one, and that's so that competes with AutoTurn and Path Planner applications like that. It also has a parking geometry and striping layout tool. So those first two modules, that's this set here, or this panel here, and the second one, this is the parking one. Then what we're looking at today is the junctions, or the roundabout design tool. Again, those first two modules, those were covered in a previous webinar. I believe it was a couple months back, but you can go see that on our YouTube page and watch that video if you're interested. So the AVT roundabout design tool. Okay, it starts with a set of design standards in there, and you can see from the screenshot on the right there's a number of different design standards from around the world. Of course, we're interested in the Federal Highways Administration design standards. So in there are the 2000 and the 2010 standards for urban, rural, a number of different roundabouts. We'll touch on that once we get into the software. You can also create some of your own standards. So those standards files, or those standards, excuse me, that you see to the right there, those are actually saved in a file that can be saved out, and you can make copies of those and then tweak those according to perhaps your local standards. So those aren't the only thing that govern the design. Those basically give you the starting point, because as we know, most roundabout design is everyone is different. There's some nuances to each design you may do. So what does the design tool do? What does the roundabout tool do? It creates a dynamically linked model. So if you're familiar with the intersection tool in Civil 3D, this is kind of that on steroids. It does quite a bit more than that, and it should, because roundabouts are fairly complex. So starting with two, perhaps crossing roads, maybe it's 5 legs that come into the roundabout, maybe it's 3, it doesn't really matter, but you're starting with some alignments and profiles, and what it's going to do is generate additional alignments and profiles that represent those curb lines, that represent the center circle. It's also going to generate assemblies, and those assemblies will be used in corridor baselines and regions to model out the different pieces. We'll look at that in more detail when we get in the software. It's also going to take those assemblies and it's going to assign targets to those sub-assemblies. It's going to be targeting the very alignments and profiles that it automatically creates. So similar, like I said, to the intersection tool in Civil 3D, this will create dynamically linked alignments and profiles, and then it will target those exact alignments and profiles. It will also create a roundabout object, and I'll show you that. I'll pick on that. You'll kind of see what that is, but that's the object that basically you interface through to make the majority of your edits to your roundabout. So a quick poll, let's just see what people are doing with their roundabout design right now. Scott's going to send that out. So the question is, which percentage of your projects contain roundabout design? We're just trying to get a feel for how much people are doing this, or how much they expect to be doing it in the future. Just get a feel for the audience. One of the questions that came in besides that poll, by the way, was, is there an AVT available for 2014? And yes, there is. There is a version for 2014 out there. So polls came in. Looks like about 86% of us are doing roundabouts 0 to 25% of the time. So not a ton of experience, but I expect to see that more and more. From what I've learned in the industry, they're becoming more and more popular. So this is definitely a cool tool to help us with that. We'll have one more poll question down the road. So a little bit more about the roundabout design tool. One of the benefits of it is it really responds to changes very well. Like I said, it creates a dynamically linked model, and what this means is you can go and make changes on the fly. So if you look at my screenshot down below there, I'm actually grabbing the center of the roundabout and just graphically moving it. It's a very intuitive way to edit things, right? Maybe that we have to avoid some right-of-way or something like that. I also have a dialog box where I can dive into all the different elements, the different legs, different pieces of my roundabout, and make those tweaks. So a lot of these numbers that it will start with, those will come from that standards file. And then we can go beyond that and make additional changes to it. It takes relevant roundabout design parameters and tabulates them. And these are actually linked tables right to the roundabout object itself. And so here's one for leg 3 on First Street, for example. Tabulates those relevant values. And they're all dynamic, so as you go and make changes to your roundabout, this table will update. There's signage and striping as well that's created in here. Again, it's all linked to that central roundabout object. So we're going to do a little demo here. We're going to start with pointing out some of the standards files in place there. We'll just take a peek at those. We'll move on to making some horizontal geometry, generating those alignments, looking at how to manipulate that. Then we'll turn on the corridor and we'll look at the baselines and the regions that it creates, and dive in a little bit to the targets and then of course the frequency as well. And we'll make some tweaks here and there to the frequency. Some of it isn't what I would call optimum, so I'll kind of point out some of those things as well. We'll go ahead and build a surface out of it. We'll look at some of the ramifications there. How do you build a good surface out of this roundabout tool? It's much like you would with a corridor, but there's of course a few additional considerations. We'll jump in, we'll look at the striping, the splitter islands, and the signage as well. And then I'll touch on the fastest path analysis that's in here as well. And just to note, I'd like to mention, you know, even though there's a small percentage of us actually doing roundabouts in our projects, I've been using Civil 3D a lot of years, and in this tool is probably the most powerful thing I've seen in Civil 3D. Whether it works for what you're doing, that remains to be seen. I've been exploring this with some other clients, seeing the validity of it. How well can this be used for realistic roundabout design? It's been around for a number of years before Autodesk acquired it, but for what it creates, the model it creates, the speed it creates it in, and how much flexibility you have, there really is nothing more powerful than Civil 3D right now. So that's why we're taking a webinar and dedicating an entire one to it. So with that said, let me jump into Civil 3D, and we're going to be working within Civil 3D 2015. As I said, there is a 2014 version, but we're going to be in 2015. If you haven't seen 2015 yet, certainly you'll notice now there's a slightly different interface. There's kind of a charcoal black ribbon up there. Of course, you can go back to everything you might be used to. Other significant changes down on the bottom here, they've basically taken your model and layout tabs and put it in the same bar or the same strip as your O-snaps and those types of settings. And they've also pushed all those settings to the right now and kind of switched the order around. So while it is possibly a little annoying, the switch they've made, I think this is actually a very streamlined layout down here. Of course, they've changed a few icons as well. Got to do that every year. So Autodesk Vehicle Tracking, that's this tab up here. So it installs a tab in Civil 3D. And again, here's the swept path analysis. That's this panel over here. So that's basically the auto turn type functionality. Here's the parking layout panel right here. And what we're working with today is the junctions panel for making roundabouts. So the drawing I'm starting with here is fairly simple. There's a existing ground surface there. I have two basic alignments in there, and I have some profiles drawn for them. Now, how you structure this, does it have to be 2 alignments? Can it be 4? Can it be 3 alignments? It can be anything you want, actually. It's very flexible in how it works. I just happen to have it drawn this way. But I was playing with the tool, and I drew alignments in many, many different ways, and it handled all of them. So to start with, we're going to look at the standards that it's going to build the roundabout out of. So everything is from this panel, and it may seem fairly simple, but there's actually quite a bit going on in this tool. So this first button here, the Junction Standard Explorer, I'm going to click on that, and it opens this standards dialog box. And I have a number of different standards in here, namely the US. And I can drill down in here. I can grab my 2010 standards, perhaps the urban single roundabout, and I can say set as default standard. And now that's bold. And when I come out of here and I go ahead and click the new roundabout button, that's going to be the standard it starts with. I'm going to hit close. Actually, before we go in there, let me just open up this standard once. So if I can right click on it and go to view, I get on the left side a list of categories that are relevant to the roundabout. And if I expand that, for example, the central island, okay, what are the default starting diameters, the apron width, and so forth. Leg geometry, okay, what is for leg geometry, the entry lane width, the exit lane width, so on and so forth. All these settings are what my roundabout's going to start with, and I'll be able to modify them further beyond that, specific to the roundabout model I create. I can also take, like I'd said, I can take these standards and I can make copies of them. And I can make my own standards, and I can open other standards that someone has provided to me. So this is an ATJ file. And that's what these standards will be saved in. So let's close out of there, and we'll just jump right into it. So we're not going to be able to cover every little parameter and every little thing in the tool, but we'll give you a nice introduction to it, hopefully give you a feel for the power of it and what it can do. So I'm going to start right up here, click the new roundabout tool. And it launches me into a wizard. The wizard is actually verifying some drawing settings, and then it's going to launch me into a number of dialog boxes after this to create the roundabout. So this first page, this is the scale. I'm not going to get into this too much. It has to do with the scaling of the objects that are placed on the screen relevant to the actual scale in the drawing, the current scale down here rather. Kind of some nuanced settings. I'm going to move on to the surfaces. The surface that I'm going to be referencing or targeting to is going to be the existing ground. That's the surface I have in here right now. I'm going to click on the corridor tab. Okay. What this tool does is, like I said, it creates alignments and profiles and corridors and assemblies. We're going to back off a little bit, and we're going to turn off some of this. We're going to start with just creating alignments. Okay. So you'll notice there's a create alignments checkbox. And then there's a corresponding update alignments, create profiles, update profiles. Okay, what this means to update profiles, this is ideally what you would want. It means as you change the roundabout object parameters, those alignments that were generated from it will update as well. So basically, this checkbox means keep everything linked and dynamic. So we'll come back and turn on the corridor. The road markings tabs, there's a couple standards in here. We'll grab the vehicle tracking one. And it's going to just default by putting some of those in here. So I hit OK and it launches me into the new junction dialog box. So this junction is, so maybe this is the street crossing names or something like this, right? Intersection name. And that's the name of the roundabout object itself. And when I hit OK, it prompts me for a center of the new roundabout. Okay, it doesn't need to be the intersection of these alignments. It can be anywhere really. So I'll drop it in here and put a little off center. Okay, and there's my roundabout. And it throws me right into another command here. It says select the line defining the new axis road center line. Okay, so that's just picking one of these alignments. If I pick this, it then gives me the new leg dialog box. So it's pretty interactive. You're picking things on the screen. It's throwing dialog boxes at you. It gives it a name by default, and then it's reading a profile that's associated with that. Okay, so it's defaulting to the layout profile that is in there. It's not defaulting to the surface profiles that have been generated. So I'll hit OK. And right away what it does is it generates not only the striping, but the alignments for this leg. Okay. It also gives me a table, and we'll talk about those more in a second. So a roundabout clearly needs more than one leg. So I can stay right in this command. I can now go and pick another alignment up here. This would be leg 2 on 2nd Street. Hit OK. And right away it's starting to give me more information. Let's put a third one in here as well. Leg 3 on 1st Street. Hit OK. Now I'll hit enter and finish that. So there's my roundabout object. Nothing 3D yet, just 2D. Okay. But I want to point out a few things here. If I click on these chevrons, for example here, this is the roundabout object. It's similar to, if you've used the intersection tool, it's similar to that kind of big bullseye that it generates right in the middle of your intersection. This is kind of like that. And it's through this object that you get to make a bunch of changes to and edit parameters and such. So for example, I can pick on this now, and I can go up to Edit Roundabout. This is how I get into those parameters that we just saw in the standards file. Here's that list of standards on the left here. So let me go to this area. Here's where I can get to the central island, for example. So that apron width out here. Notice also as I pick on these values over here, this diagram gives me a nice idea of what I'm talking about, because we're looking at dozens and dozens of different values here, and it's easy to get lost in these dialog boxes. So go ahead and pick around what is what, helps you understand what's what. So perhaps it's a 10-foot apron width. I hit apply and I'll see that change in my horizontal geometry. Set the center island diameter to 60. It automatically sets the apron diameter to 80. I hit apply and I'll see that change in my roundabout. Okay, if that diagram isn't needed, you click that little diagram button down here and it goes away. We'll come back in here. We'll make many different changes in here, coming back into this dialog box. I'm going to go over here. I'm going to pick on this roundabout again. I'm going to change a few of the value, or I want to do some grip edits here. So right here, this grip, adjust roundabout center point. Okay, I can grab this and I can move this. And you notice as I'm doing it, it's moving all those linked alignments and profiles as well as the striping objects. Okay, and again, all these radii in here, these are all based on those design standards. So it's just a starting point. We can certainly modify those after the fact. Okay, I can now at this point, got a button up here, I can say new road. Let's put in that 4th roadway. It says select vehicle tracking junction. That'll be this entire object. And it says select the line defining the new axis road center line. So that's this alignment over here. Again, it names it. Hit OK. There's that fourth junction. Still everything dynamic. Okay. Lots of different grips. I won't explore all of them today, but you can hover on them. Adjust island radius, right? Drag this in. I can do grip edits in that way. So some of the alignments it's generating. There's an alignment, if you can see that, you can see all those grips. There's an alignment for each of the 4 quadrants like this. Okay, so it's basically running down the center of that leg, and then it goes along the outside of the circle of the center of the roundabout over to here. Okay, there's a number of these for each leg. Okay, once we generate the corridor, you'll be able to see a little more clearly the baselines and regions, and that'll help you understand the alignments and profiles a little better. So let's go and do that. Actually, let's build our corridor, turn on our corridor, and then we'll go ahead and make further changes to the geometry as well. So I can go back up here to edit roundabout. Edit this roundabout, and I get back into this window. And down here is the corridor tab. And if you remember when we originally created it, we left these unchecked. Create profiles, create corridor. Well, now we want those turned on. So I can turn on create profiles, leave it to update. I can turn on create corridor, leave that to update. And then there's a couple other checkboxes here. Use simple road assembly or use curb baselines. Okay. Use simple road is to not put any curb on here. It's to just model the lanes. To put curb in there, I say use curb baselines. Straightforward enough. Require existing surface. What I found is the corridor won't build if you don't have an existing daylight surface assigned to it. So if this is checked on and you don't have that surface assigned down here, it won't work. So require existing surface, we're good with that. I'm going to say rebuild now. You'll see it churning away, and it's going to generate my corridor. So that's my 3D model now. I can close out of here. And now I have my corridor model. So let's understand what's being built a little bit here. I'm going to first go to a couple viewports. And in the right side, I'm going to go look at the assemblies that came into the drawing. And on the left side, I'm going to look at the corridor. So again, like the Civil 3D intersection tool, there's a number of regions and baselines being generated here. So for the baselines, and I've just turned on this command here, but you can see me highlight them. So I've got a baseline right here. I've got a baseline right here, one right there, and then one in the center. Okay. There's actually two baselines here. There's multiple baselines it shows there in the tooltip. There's two right on top of each other. It gets fairly nuanced as to how the corridor is built, but basically the entire roundabout is built on these 5 different baselines, these 5 different geometry paths, and you can kind of see that with these corridor links, these assembly links. They're perpendicular to this. They're perpendicular to this baseline. Okay. The regions that are being built, let's look at each of these legs here. There's one region for the lane, okay? And if I jump over here, that's just simply using an assembly like this. Very simple assembly. And then there's another region for the curb and daylight portion, and that's right here. So they're both running on the same baselines. But those look like this, okay? And it's built this way to allow it to be very dynamic and flexible. Could those be on the same Yes, potentially, but that's the way the program was set up. Okay, and then this region in here, again, it's built on a baseline that's basically a circle on the outside of the apron there. And it's this assembly right here. So really no curb or anything yet. So we'll go ahead and add some of that in. I'm going to go to my tool palettes. I'm going to go to the curbs, and I'm going to grab a mountable curb here. We'll put that on the left side. We're going to add this in here. I'm going to connect it to the assembly there. What you're probably wondering is, why are these lanes so tiny? There's some imperial metric conversion going on here that's a little screwy yet, and this out-of-the-box setup is basically making these lanes smaller. As far as the finished grade surface, it makes no difference because absolutely everything in here is controlled by targets. So let me go in here now, and I'll go ahead and rebuild that corridor. And now we can see those curb lines showing up in there. Okay. You also see that that lane is terminating right there. It used to come right into the inside of the apron. Okay. That's a target that was lost, right? As soon as you move a subassembly, that target that might have been assigned to it in the corridor is lost. Okay. I can come back into my corridor here, and I can tell it to rebuild, close out, and you'll see those targets now update. So some of the targets that are at play here, let's grab one of these regions here. It's a very simple region, like I said. There's a width target and there's an elevation target. And these are targeting basically that center of that road and the edge of the roundabout there. But it's not targeting the alignment that I drew. It's targeting the alignment and profile that it generated. So what I mean is that it's targeting that alignment and the profiles and so forth. Excuse me, not that one, this one right here. Okay, it runs all the way around here. Okay, so that's one region targeting that. Those alignments and profiles, those are the ones linked to the roundabout object that I'm controlling. So what about frequency? If you notice, I pick on here, and some of my regions, you can see this when I kind of highlight different regions here. It's not really filling in this area here. Okay, so this is just a general corridor issue. If I go into my corridor properties, I go to the parameters tab and I go to set all frequencies. And if you haven't seen 2015 yet, there's actually some nice improvements in corridors. Here's one of them I'm a big fan of. So let's set the frequency along tangents to 10 feet. So that's how often the assembly is being inserted along there. So I'm doing this for the entire corridor. And here's one of the enhancements. Along curves, the default was at an increment. In fact, that was the only way it worked. You didn't have this drop down here. What you have now is by curvature. And what by curvature means is to specify mid-ordinate distance. Basically what that means is the tighter the radius of your curve, the tighter your frequency will be. So a mid-ordinate distance is a value that has a lot of, it basically slides up and down depending on your radius value. Best of both worlds is set it to both. So I can set my increment to 10 and that to 0.2. Okay. Hit OK, hit OK. And you're going to see the frequency along here update. Okay, let's jump back in there again. Let's address this open gap that's right there. at offset target geometry points. That's one setting down here. Let's set that to yes. We'll hit OK and hit OK. So just looking at a couple of the questions come in, I'll address a couple of those right now. One is it possible to create a mass override change to the roundabouts once a project is complete? I'm not sure exactly what you mean by a mass override change, but certainly things like changing the center of the roundabout. So I've got the corridor built right now. I can move the center of this roundabout, and the corridor will update with it. Okay. There's many changes that can be made in here. So the edit roundabout, I can look at these different legs. I can look at the entry, the exit, the lane width, the number of lanes. I can be specifying all that kind of stuff. So in my opinion, those are pretty big changes. Another question is, can the alignments be left of center instead of straight to the center of the circle? I assume you're referring to the alignments I had here generated initially. If this isn't the case, go ahead and write in again. But yeah, these two alignments, the center of that roundabout can be anywhere relative to those. In fact, you can drag this out, and it kind of gives you a limit. You know, I drag this to a certain point, and then it basically errors out on me because it can't do the calculations. I'm not sure if that's what you're asking. Go ahead and write in again if that wasn't clear. And the final question, do the roadways need to be symmetrical in the number of lanes? Example, if a one-way feeds into the roundabout. Yeah, can you remove an exit lane? You know, I'm not sure right offhand if that's possible. I'd have to check into it some more. We'll get back to that one at the end of the webinar. And again, back to that question, can the lines be left of center instead of straight to the center of the circle? I'm going to let that go to afterwards. I'm not quite sure what's being asked there. Please go ahead and email in, and I can chat with whoever's sending that in afterwards. Be glad to kind of address those questions. But we'd just like to move on here with the introduction. So anyway, some of the frequency, we addressed that. And again, even though this corridor is created, I can still generate or make changes to these parameters. Another thing here, what about the circle itself? Right now it's just flat. Okay, I want to get some slope to it. Okay, we'll be able to see this better when we get our surface in here. So let me go ahead and turn our surface on. And then we'll go and take the center portion here, and we'll give it a side slope, basically take a whole plane and tip it in different directions. And we'll see the corridor adjust accordingly. So I'm going to go to corridor surfaces. And I'm going to create a surface in here. I'm going to give it a style of 1 and 5 design. Give it top links. And go to corridor extents for outer boundary. Okay, we'll come back to surfaces. We'll talk more about them in a second, but I want to have my contours show up so we can see this. So there's my surface built, and you can see that one contour running all the way around. So this whole thing is flat. It's not tipping one way or another. So how do you handle that? Okay, back in the Edit Roundabout tool. I've got level and grades in here, and right now it's defaulting. Okay, so let's look at a couple of the options here. Take elevation from. Okay, this is the center. Where's that reading from? I could set it to user define and bump that up some. I hit apply. You're going to see that change reflected out here. You saw those contours adjust. I can also now take as overall cross slope or a tilted plane, right? Let's set that to 2%. I'll hit apply. And when I do that, you'll see an arrow show up in the middle, and you'll also see my contours adjust. There's those contours. If I put a slope elevation on there, slope arrow, start to see those slopes on there. Okay, so those were just 1-point slope arrows. This is, of course, can be edited with grips. I can change the slope direction in this way, and as I do that, the corridor updates with it as well. Sometimes these grip edits, you have to run a corridor rebuild afterwards, and then those contours will update accordingly. So like I said, a lot of these edits either through grip editing or coming in here and making those changes, levels and grades. So 2% instead of grip editing, I can just put in an angle instead. And we'll see that reflected out there. Rebuild the corridor, and we'll see those contours update a little better. Let's take a look at this surface. So this surface is just reading links from this right now. If we take a look at this surface in the object viewer, one of the things we'll notice if I zoom in here, the way this thing is built, remember the two baselines that were running along the edge here? Okay, the curve baseline is built on one, and the lane baseline is built on another. It's just the way that the tool works. But what you end up with is really kind of some goofy triangulation. So some of you may know the answer to this already. It's using feature lines in your corridor surface. The other thing we'll address is this triangulation in this area here. It's not quite triangulating the way we'd expect. The way to handle that is to force top links to be break lines in our corridor surface. So again, these are core corridor functions, but they really come into play and they're very relevant in a corridor like this. So let me go into corridor surfaces. Okay, the first thing we want to say add as break line for top links. That's going to force triangulation along top links in those areas where there's a lot of kind of warping of the tin. Okay, the second thing we want to do is we want to grab feature lines from our corridor. And we want to add those to the surface. So I'm going to do this at key curb points. So top of curb, back of curb, flow line of the gutter, and the flange. When I do that, you're going to see the corridor surface building quite a bit better when I take a look at it in 3D here. So for starters, we now see those tin lines coming right into the center point. That's the kind of straight grade we were after right there. And if I look at my curb, we'll see nice triangulation along that as well. Okay. Need more detail? Okay, it's coming down to our frequency then, right? The frequency along here, perhaps that's not enough. Have to dial that up. Let's go ahead and make a subassembly change too. We've got little ditches running along here. Perhaps we want just a basic daylight slope. Okay. In the same way you can with the intersection object or the intersection tool in Civil 3D, you can make assembly changes here. And we did that once already. We put that curb in here. But let me show you another change as well. So let's go put in a different subassembly. And this is a nice new feature here. I can pick on this, set my parameters, go to the right side. And this new feature here, I can hit R for replace and start swapping out those subassemblies. So that wasn't there before. The beauty of this is when I swap these out, my default setting right now is to hold onto the corridor targets. So when I escape out of there, that's all reflected in my corridor. All those daylight targets are held in there. Pretty cool. So that goes for any corridors in there. A few other things to point out. There are dynamic tables in here specifying relevant parameters of each of these quadrants or each of these legs. And you noticed, if you noticed, when I was moving that center, those values are updating right on the fly. So pretty cool tool there. Some of the other options in here. Let me go ahead and take this corridor. And for the moment, I'm just going to turn off all those regions so we can look at some of the roundabout striping and signage tools. So the striping, some of the striping and signage is coming in already. Okay, you can notice the yield sign coming in there. Signage coming in right here. Okay, there's additional options we have on that. So let's look at one of the legs here. Let's look at leg 1, and we've got crosswalk, for example. I can turn on the crosswalk, and then I've got different entry types here. I hit apply, and now you'll see that crosswalk show up. Actually, I have rumble strips we can put in there. Hit apply, and those show up down here. And again, all this stuff is always dynamic. You always have grip edits on this stuff. Let's go to leg 4 down here. Speed striping. Put speed striping on here and rumble strips on the other one. That works, right? Speed striping shows up down there. Okay. You may have noticed these red lines coming through here. Okay, that's the fastest path. I'll just touch on that a bit here. Fastest path analysis. Okay. There's tools in there for that analysis type. I'm not going to get into those deep here, but that's handled in here as well. So the majority of your parameter editing happens in this window, and there's literally hundreds of them in here. But beyond that, you probably noticed there's grips all over this thing, right? Small grip editing is possible on the layout here as well. Okay, and when I do that, that's updating the whole corridor. So if we turn that corridor back on, and give it a rebuild, we'll see that update as well. A few other items I'll point out here. A lot of different add and remove or add and delete options up here. We did a new road, delete a road. Okay, there's a new splitter island. Let's put in a splitter island. It's prompting me to select a vehicle tracking junction. Okay, it says select location of the new splitter island. If you can see it there, there's kind of a big green X showing up as I hover over one of these legs. If I pick there, it's giving me an error. Let's do it on this one over here. Give me an error again. So there's parameters in my standards that aren't allowing me to fit this in. And those come down to these. I'm not sure the exact one governing it right now, but its values in here that are basically not allowing that splitter island to fit in there. So that's most of what I wanted to show you guys today. A few other things to mention. These other tools like the swept path analysis, I can run 3D analysis on top of this now. It's pretty nice for visualization, running a semi-truck or something through your roundabout to see how that would work. Like I said, that's what this animate button is about. The help menu, it's actually pretty extensive on this. Okay, it's a very nice help menu. I can launch it from right there, or when I'm right in the middle of a dialog box, like Splitter Island, I can click on help there, and it's going to throw me right into the definitions of those parameters. So pretty extensive, pretty nice help menu. You know, one thing that's always an issue with Civil 3D is the stability of it. You know, corridors, they're not too bad. I think the worst in Civil 3D are probably grading tools or maybe parcel objects. The stability of this is amazingly well. It's pretty good. The ability to shift things like this, and this is, you know, a shift of a number of different alignments and profiles and a rebuild of a corridor as well. That's quite a bit going on, and it hasn't crashed on me yet, so I think it's pretty stable. And one last little poll here. We'll send that out now. For those of us who are doing some roundabout design, just kind of curious what applications, if any, what methods you might be using. And we kind of have a number of different answers there. Go ahead and pick what's relevant to you, and we'll see what people are using out there. So quite a spread there. We have about a third of us not doing roundabouts, just attending for the fun of it. About another third of us designing on paper and then drafting in AutoCAD or a similar workflow. Some designing in a spreadsheet, and a small percentage, 7% out there, using vehicle tracking right now. So definitely be curious how that's working out for you guys, if you guys have run through some full projects with it, had some success with it. And then another 13% using some other kind of roundabout modeling tool or application. So if you have any other questions, feel free to submit them. I will follow up with the one question that wasn't fully addressed. But with that, thanks a lot for watching. And then I do want to mention one other thing. You know, we do a lot of events at CTC, and we're trying to make it easier for you guys to attend them and understand them. And so let me just jump to my CTC, to the CTC homepage. We've got an events page here, and this has recently been revamped by Scott. He's done a great job on it. If you don't like it, be sure to complain to him. So a lot nicer looking layout. We've got a lot of events, a lot of webinars. We found this is a great way to be reaching our customers, to getting information out to them so they understand the tools that they have. And we've had a lot of success with a lot of people attending these webinars, and of course all these end up on YouTube. So be sure to be checking our events page. We're of course gearing up for what we're calling Midwest U. That'll be in the winter, I think February. Yeah. We're expanding into Midwest U instead of Minnesota University, because we had a lot of people thinking it wasn't geared towards them if they're outside of Minnesota. So it's Midwest New, or Midwest U. So be sure to look at that. And if you're interested, we'd love to have some abstracts submitted. Last year we had 55 classes, had a lot of success with it, and we'd like to keep that number up there again, and get a lot of our clients and people in the industry coming in there teaching classes. So with that, thanks a lot for watching. And if you have any other questions, feel free to submit. Otherwise, have a good day. Thank you.